Hello, and welcome to this solstice. I nearly said equinox, this solstice forecast. And I did do an equinox forecast for the Libra equinox, and here we are at the Capricorn solstice, which in the southern hemisphere is our summer solstice, and in the northern hemisphere is your winter solstice. So I'm going to try and stick to calling it the Capricorn solstice, just because obviously that's a little bit more neutral to hemisphere neutral. So yes, here we find ourselves looking at the chart. And saying that, I have set the chart up for where I live in the Placidus house system, which means that it is, as you can see here, Capricorn rising. That won't be the case more than likely where you live. So don't worry too much about where you see things in this wheel, as I say all the time, but rather how it impacts your own personal chart. Or if you're wanting to look at it as more accurately for where you live, then just go and draw up a chart. This is AstroSeek that I'm using, so you can go and use that and then draw up the chart for your part of the world. So we find ourselves having these 4 seasonal portal shifts, and 2 of them are solstice points and 2 of them are equinox points. So at the moment, we're in the solstice point, and then halfway to the next solstice, we have an equinox. And the equinox points are where we're in between, and we're kind of balanced. And the day and night are of equal length, in fact, equinox. And so it's these 2 points that are the balance points. And interesting, for example, when we're looking at Libra is the scale, Libra is balance. That's one of the equinox points. When the sun hits 0 degrees of Libra, that's the last one we looked at. And if you look back to see what that season, the chart of that Libra equinox showed us, you can see how that season played out for you. If you look at that forecast, which was 3 months back. So here we find ourselves at the next point, 3 months from there, where the sun now enters the next cardinal sign. Cardinal signs are leader signs. They are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. So whenever the sun enters one of those signs, 0 degrees of a cardinal sign, that is where we're either at an equinox or at a solstice. So the last time that happened was our Libra equinox, when the sun went to 0 degrees of cardinal air, Libra. Now we're at, for this forecast, we're going to be at 0 degrees cardinal earth, Capricorn. Our last one we looked at being the leader of that season, that seasonal cycle being Venus. And now we look at the leader of this seasonal cycle being Saturn. Saturn's really well placed in this chart. So that's actually great for us that Saturn is ruling this chart, because he's really playing in. You can see him here at 2 degrees of Pisces, and he's in sextile to the sun at 0 Capricorn, and he's in sextile to the moon, who's already in domicile and very happy at 0 degrees of Taurus, and even to Jupiter at 5 degrees of Taurus. So, and you can see that the sun and moon are at also a very happy trine point. So they are both at 0 degrees of their sign. They are both at earth signs. So there is and earth is practical. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn has this structural, practical, methodical, systematic kind of energy. And at that same point at which we have Capricorn, the systematic planet, ruling over this particular season, we have sun and moon at 0 degrees of earth signs. So it's uber practical. And this is a really, really great time for us to be manifesting, using our ceremonies, our rituals, our magic, whatever it is that you like to use. This is a really promising cycle for it. And with Saturn in Pisces, we really can get the new dream moving forward. So there is this wonderful forward momentum with the new dream or the new world or the new reality that we're in the process of creating. So that is very exciting. And we also do have Pluto at the 29th degree again of Capricorn. So still in Capricorn, still ruled by Saturn. And for the second time, coming to the point at which he's about to shift into Aquarius. And he's going to spend a longer portion in Aquarius for next year, and then he's going to move just briefly back into Capricorn at that 29th degree again, before coming to spend the next 20 odd years in Aquarius. So where Saturn is at the beginning of this season Pluto is at the beginning of this season, which, as we're calling it, the Capricorn equinox, in the Southern Hemisphere, we're saying that's like the initiation into summer. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's the initiation into winter. And I just wanted to say that the zodiac was developed in the Northern Hemisphere. So in many ways, it makes more sense for the winter because Saturn is a cold planet. This is a cold season for you. And so that makes sense. Of course, astrologers talk about that all the time, but I live in the Southern Hemisphere. It's where I've always grown up. So I often have the lens of the opposite in some ways of what the Northern Hemisphere, well, very much the opposite, except Saturn still being a cold planet, the ruler of our hot season. So there are different ways that I have learned to metabolize that for where I live. And if you are in the Southern Hemisphere and you are wondering more about that, please mention it in the comments and I can maybe speak more into my own interpretations of how to consolidate that within an embodied way for me, being that I live in a hot country in Saturn, cold Saturn's seasons. So anyway, what I wanted to say about Pluto, what he's kind of speaking into in this like last degree during this beginning of the season is, again, let's really go deep into the powers that be, into the powers around in our lives, into the where is the control lying? How do I break down the controls that aren't working for me? How do I restructure? Which again just ties in very nicely. And at the same time as all of this, we have Mercury retrograding, and Mercury here is at 1 degree in retrograde, 1 degree of Capricorn, heading directly back into the sun, who's heading directly forward into Mercury. So this is very potent. I mean, they are already conjunct. They're a degree apart, a degree and a half apart, if we want to be pedantic. But they're moving in the same in opposite directions. So they're coming together. So it's getting stronger. It's an applying conjunction, and it will really be very pivotal part of the narrative of this season. Because when we look at this chart, we're basically looking at this chart like when I do a full moon forecast, that is leading us to the next full moon. So that's a month. When we do a seasonal reading like this, an equinox or solstice reading, we're taking it to the next, in this case, to the next equinox, to the Aries equinox. So it's a 3-month cycle that we're kind of looking at what is the initiating energy for this next season, this next 3-month cycle. And I'm sure you know, but I will repeat this anyway, is when we hit a cardinal sign, which is a leadership sort of sign, initiating, like Capricorn, when the sun enters Capricorn, it begins a season, and that is 1 month of this initiating, in this case, through cardinal Earth. Then it comes into a fixed sign, and in this case, it'll be Aquarius, fixed air, and it's going to bring us into the intensity of winter. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, summer for us here, it's like, I am summer or winter. This is what I am. Don't push me. Don't rush me. That's what I'm doing. I'm in process. That's the fixed sign energy. That's when we really do focus, fixate, intensify, dig down, that sort of thing into a season. And there'll be 1 month of that. And following that will be Pisces, which is the mutable sign of this particular season. And Pisces, because it's mutable, is where we're beginning to shift, go, okay, well, maybe it's time to not be fixed in my season any further, because it is time for me to contemplate the fact that the season is shifting. We can't stay in summer all the time. We're stepping towards our autumn, or in the Northern Hemisphere, we can't stay in winter forever. We're stepping towards our spring. So this is where we start to feel the change in the air. Even though it's not yet that next season, we start to feel the promise of the season that's coming, that's mutable. And then we get into the equinox point of 0 Aries, and we begin again. Cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable, and so we go. I'm sorry, my neighbor is riding on one of those black bikes that you push up and down. I hope you can't hear it. So this is a insight for us into the next 3 months and into the season that we are currently going through. And as I say, really, really powerful, with sun and moon having this really good dynamic. And then we have in the middle of sun and moon, we have Saturn, who's ruling this. Really, the three of them are creating this beautiful holding space for this new season that is practical, that lives towards the dream. It's really got some lovely aspects. While there's a very, very strong power dynamic with Pluto, and also with Mars and Venus. They're only 30 degrees away from each other. They were quite pivotal in our last season. And they're literally exactly 30 degrees away from each other. They can't see each other, but they can kind of feel it. So it's like those conversations where you are not able to connect with the person directly. Maybe you can't get them on the phone, or you know you need to have the conversation, but you're avoiding it. That's kind of where Mars and Venus is sitting, and they're extremely relational. So they're the Venus, the feminine, Mars, the masculine, Venus, the attractor, Mars, the go-getter. You know, they have that opposing kind of energy within them. And in them, unlike Sun and Moon, who have bring us another level of that masculine, feminine, they're in a good conversation, and they're almost like the wiser, elder versions of Mars and Venus. So they're a little bit more mature within this space of relating. They're like more practical because they're currently in earth signs. They're saying, you know what, it takes work, it takes effort, it takes reliability, consistency, practicality. It's not always all height of passion, Sagittarius, Mars, and passion, intensity, emotional depth, Venus in Scorpio. You know, it's not always that. Sometimes it's just slow and steady wins the race. Sometimes it's just doing the practical things that need to be done. That's what the Sun and Moon is speaking to in terms of relationship. Whereas Mars and Venus are like, if it isn't intensely passionate or intensely adventurous or intensely anything, then something's missing. She's wanting this and he's wanting that. Now, bear in mind, this can be playing out in your literal relationships with others, but it can also be an internal dynamic that you're working on. So they're in a bit of an awkward position where they can't see each other and they're not quite bringing to fruition some dynamic. And I feel like the relational dynamic has been spoken into for months by so many of us because it is very, very present right now, including the fact that the nodes, North Node in Aries, me, South Node in Libra, us, are speaking into that's where they want us to focus archetypally. And if you are somebody who is always giving out to the other in spite and not tending to yourself, you need to turn that around and balance it out a little. If you are somebody who is always looking out for number one and forgetting to take other into consideration, you need to balance it out a little. When we were at the last equinox point, we spoke about this a lot because those two signs are equinox signs. They're also cardinal Aries cardinal fire, Libra cardinal air. They also initiate seasons, but they initiate equinox, which is where we're trying to redress the balance because it's an easier point to balance from. However, solstice points show us the major swing. So if you think of a pendulum, where even is my pendulum? It's been here somewhere. If you think of how a pendulum swings, there's that point at which it reaches the height of one direction before it falls in the other direction. And that is what a solstice is. And there's quite a lot of light behind me. That is the other solstice point. Whereas equinox is here, solstice is here and here. And so this is less easy to get into balance naturally. The sky is not really aligning with balance, it's aligning with opposing energies. So here in the Southern Hemisphere, we are in the intensity of yang, sun, fire. It's more of a Martian type of intense, loud, busy, go-getter energy. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's more of the yin, the intensity of the darkness, the intuition, the inward time. Either way, whichever hemisphere you're in, you are likely to see the polarities of where the balance is not really aligned. So what we can do with that is we can say, well, in 6 months, I'm going to be at the opposite end of that pendulum swing, and I'm going to see the other side of it. So let's just say, as an example, here I am in the Southern Hemisphere, and maybe I'm suddenly being charged with, because this is in the Southern Hemisphere, in summer, we are more charged to socialize, to get out there. So let's say it's a busy time, there's a lot of sociability happening, it's all great, until suddenly there's exhaustion and the realization of, I've been burning the candle at both ends. It's been too intense. I just need to consolidate. for some people, the energy reserves to do that are higher, and for other people, they're lower. So here's again where you take this into your own chart and get a little more personal with it. But you know that in 6 months, you're going to go into the inward space and you'll be able to go, okay, so what's happening now? Maybe I'm too much a hermit. Maybe I'm not putting myself out there. And through this, you get to get the nuance of your own default. Again, bring this to your natal chart. It'll really help you that way. But you will get to understand where your nuance is. So another example of that would be that I am a Gemini. So this is currently, while I'm recording this, it's Sagittarius season. Sag and Gemini are opposite each other. So when the sun is shining in the opposite sign from my own chart, I'm actually more closer to the winter equinox, obviously in my hemisphere. Turn it for yours. I'm in the winter equinox. So in some ways, I feel more myself. The sun is shining in the winter in my life, in my hemisphere, in my chart. The sun is shining in the winter spaces. So that is more where I feel myself. So then in the opposite 6 months from that point, I feel a little bit of an internal pull. And now I need to look at these things that are other than me and see how do I balance that out? Where am I struggling to do Sagittarian things versus Gemini? And also what you could do in this chart, for example, if I look at that, I can say, well, if my sun is at 26 degrees of Gemini, then the equinox, as it is in my life, is going to be hitting in my sun will in this chart would be in the 6th. So I might find that this is a season of deep service for me. So I might ask myself what that looks like. And you can do this with the other planets in your chart as well. But just to give you an example of a simple way to bring it into your chart, what house is the sun sitting at in the equinox chart? But for that, you will need to put in the exact place that you live in to see, well, what does that chart show? Otherwise, you could say, where is the sun shining in my chart? So I would actually see that the sun in this chart would also be shining in my 6th house, interestingly, the sun of this cycle. So the thing to remember with this one, sorry, I also wanted to mention here that we have Venus in a strong opposition here to Uranus. So there is another nod to the change, the sudden, the quick change dynamic of relationships. You thought that you were attracted to this? Haha. Let me take that away and ask you if you're attracted to that. Venus is a keyword. One of her keywords is attraction, and Uranus is changes, revolution. Very much the breakdown to breakthrough kind of energy. So that's another nod to the relational dynamic coming in. And we always like to look at where we see something show up more than once. We also have this strong Neptune sort of square energy that's been playing out. By the time we get to this equinox, it's been in the works for a little bit. The sun is now coming off that square, but still feeling it. And Mars is coming into that square. So the Mars part is getting stronger, the Mars piece of that. And Neptune is very strong in Pisces, again, to that sort of ideal, that dream, that new magical experience that we idealize, but we can't really imagine yet how to get there. And the sun just came into square, and it was like a contrasting attempt to grind back into what could that be. And now Mars is coming there, which will facilitate some doing in that direction. So I feel actually like, because squares are what give us the traction to actually take action. In fact, squares are of the nature of Mars. So squares have that do it. And Mars is often looked at as a malefic. So sometimes when we think of Mars being a challenging planet, it's challenging us to do something. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it sometimes means like, get off your ass and get the thing done, even though it's uncomfortable. Say the thing you haven't been saying, do the thing you've always wanted to do. It's not always easy. It brings us, we have to find the warrior spirit. Remember, Mars is a warrior. So sometimes it's like, what am I going to fight for? My new beliefs, my new ideals, my new world, who am I becoming? I can't just become that by being an armchair astronaut. I have to take action. So I actually love squares because otherwise we can get a little too comfortable, but still we have that beautiful cradling of this trine from sun to moon with the sextiling, both of those planets sextiling Saturn in the middle. You can even just see how it is. It's almost like a little chalice. It's just holding some of these strong movement type energies, like the opposition of Saturn, the opposition of Uranus and Venus, and the square between Sun, Neptune, and Mars, Neptune. Those are quite intense. Yeah, I think that I'm actually going to leave it at that. Oh, no. There was one more thing I wanted to speak into. Sorry. Again, I meant to speak into this when I spoke into the nodes in Mars Libra. Mars Libra, Aries, ruled by Mars, and Libra. Because that has such a strong relational dynamic, I wanted to point out that the nodes in this chart are pretty close to Chiron, and Chiron is the wound. So it does feel to me like there is also, and this is yet another nod to the relational dynamic of the season, because it feels to me like there is this opportunity, and it's going to be closing in, getting tighter, for us to really look at where are our wounds in relationships and to look at where that came from, because it might have gone way, way back. Maybe it's not even about your personal relationship. Maybe it's what you were modeled, relationships of your parents or their parents, like inherited patterning even. Or maybe it is your relationship with one or both parents from early, or your early caregivers, or maybe it is a romantic partner, or maybe it is a business partner, or maybe it is a sibling, a friendship. Like really, relationships, that's what we do. We relate with everybody that we know. It's connection, it's relation. So look at your wounds in relationships and recognize that there is this beautiful opportunity to get a little clear. I almost want to feel the sense of flushing the wound with like salt water or something. And then it's going to hurt like crazy to flush it, but then get present about, I no longer need to take those wounds into my relationships. But then again, we need that square to Neptune, because now how do we do it differently? And usually doing it differently is very uncomfortable until you develop a new habituation towards how to be. And when we're not quite fully developed into those things, which can take a lifetime, then we do often default into our original factory settings, which are often ancestral patterning or learned in early childhood or learned through traumatic relationships in friendships, work, siblings, so on and so forth, romance, obviously. So those are a lot of aspects that I wanted to speak into. And then I just felt really called. I know I haven't done this very much in these contexts, but I wanted to draw a card for us, just one card to symbolize the seasonal portal of this solstice point. So let's see, that's too many cards. Oh, beautiful, 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 beautiful. Okay, let me just stop this share so that you can see the card. We have got the King of Swords. Now, Swords is an air sign energy, but also he has got a bit of a Saturnian feel about him because he's quite Aquarian, and Saturn is the modern ruler of the traditional ruler of Aquarius. So it's like this energy that is not overly emotional. You can see that he has some really wise animals here. He has the owl, try and get it to focus nicely, and the bat, which brings in the nighttime, both of those. He has the raven above him. And you can see the strands of energy coming off this, his hair, and by the pole, by the raven. This is like especially in this suit, this is almost like this, not the suit, the deck, which is called the Lightseer's Tarot by Chris Ann. It's kind of like the unraveling of old thought forms and the sorting out of the monkey mind. If you think about your thoughts as like a massive ball of multicolored yarns, and it's hard to pinpoint one thought from the other. By the time we reach the King of Swords, we've kind of developed this sense of clear thinking, pattern in our thinking, slowing down. Air can be very fast and jerky. In this case, we're feeling okay, I can sit with that. he's also very emotionally intelligent because he has been able to calm his thinking. So this is a really lovely, practical, good building businessman kind of feel. And yes, this is a man, it's the king, but that can also speak to the masculine in you. So again, interesting, if you're in the southern hemisphere, as I am, then we might say we're at the height of the masculine, and we get this card. On the other side of the planet, you might be feeling the height of the feminine, and you may need this to start pulling you back from that place, recognizing where you need to balance out the masculine. So in the southern hemisphere, we might be saying, okay, let me mature the masculine before the swing to the feminine begins, so that I start from a grounded, inner, internal, sacred masculine space. I hope that makes sense. This is a good sort of archetypal energy to work with, the King of Swords. Love that card for this season. I hope this has been helpful for you. Please check out my links below, and likes, shares, follows, subscribes, all very, very welcome. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon.